I think it shows that, like in the recent campaigns, that it is a player. The candidates are showing up on it, but is that like a real news source? Is it a motivation for political participation?
I think, I mean, there's a lot being written up about that these days, and I think it is really pretty interesting. I distinctly remember the night before the election on The Daily Show in 2004, Jon Stewart's words were, "Make my job harder." That, go out and make government more competent, so it's harder for me to satirize it. I think on one level, that shows the tremendous benefit and the tremendous caution of things like The Daily Show. That yes, it's getting people aware and involved in the news, but it's also kind of making them jaded. It's adding this level of cynicism, like, yeah, well, that's great, they screwed up again. What are you going to do next? And moreover, what can I do to make that better? They're just going to keep screwing it up again. And I think and then obviously, with the advent of the Colbert Report, we've just kind of gone completely off the cliff there in terms of satire into this entirely other dimension. At the same time, I think you see that particular field as realizing its responsibility a little bit more. I think you're seeing a lot of joking, but you're seeing a lot of, hey, don't take this joking too far or it becomes real. Like, I mean, Stephen Colbert entering in the South Carolina primary. I mean, I still don't know what to make of that. Was it getting a lot of people interested, or was it just absolutely ridiculous? And but then again, like stunt candidacies are nothing new. They've been done by political satirists for years. But more recently, Colbert had a Pennsylvania straw poll in which he kind of offhandedly said Pennsylvania voters shouldn't be the only people to vote in the Pennsylvania primary, and was kind of joking about that. But I think the undercurrent of that was that the voting that took place involved making donations to public schools in Pennsylvania. That they're making an effort to make a connection to something that really matters, and I think they're highlighting the website that it worked through is a really interesting website in terms of connecting teachers and other organizations with specific resource needs to people who can provide those needs. So I think they're slowly developing a sense of responsibility.
I have a question about what the next steps would be in the research enterprise you laid out here. I think it's important to note that the LSA-wide data you're working with is not for a cohort from your generation, but rather from a cohort that's closer to my generation. I graduated high school in 1988. So, but you're also drawing conclusions here about your generation, trying to discuss the implications of that. So, thinking about what you would do next, how could you obtain data on your own generation to verify what you found from the cohort you studied in the LSA-Y study?
Well, I mean, obviously, to have the resources to conduct a similar large-scale study that tracks students over a number of years would be amazing. To be able to ask students about how they use the internet, if they use it for more personal means, if they feel there's a connection between their internet use and their knowledge of news, like questions like, I get most of my internet from A, B, C, or D. I think that's probably the big question that's up next. I think is the question of where you get your news from. And in fact, that Times article I was talking about was the main question they were asking. It was a Pew Research survey, and it was asking, and that was primarily what they wanted to know, where you get your news from. And the generational contrast is really pretty strong. That you're looking at college students getting most of their information from the internet, and then you're looking at 30-40 somethings getting their information mostly from like CNN and from like 24-hour news, and then you're looking at older people still, the broadcast news in the evening is where is the reliable source. So I mean, I think you see this kind of gradient going down in terms of how, I think that's the big change, where people are getting their news from. So.
let me pose another
Oh,
question.
okay.
If you don't mind, to ask you to expand on it a little bit more. What would you expect? What would you expect to see if you were to examine a cohort from today's generation in terms of the relationship between media and participation, and also I think in terms of parental influence, because you have the snapshot we see declining parental influence between these two periods of time, between the 70s and the 80s.
I guess the big thing in terms of kind of going with that different types of media, I think you're seeing that that's becoming a more personal and personal distinction. Whereas with this study, television's obviously the main big thing that's on the rise, but everything's becoming more global. Your newspapers and news magazines are going to cover more global issues and things like that. And I think we've kind of reached a plateau with that, where we're covering the world about as instantly as we possibly can. And you're going to be seeing the distinctions of being, does the way you get your news, is it pretty impersonal and indirect? Are you just kind of consuming directly, or are you consuming interactively? Are you consuming news media and then discussing it, offering feedback, blogging about it, whatever? I think that's going to be a big distinction with regard to the parental factor. It's hard to say. I think.
See, one of the things I asked that question because one thing I noticed about students today seem to be much closer contact with their parents than people in my generation. So I'm wondering if there could be a strengthening in that kind of.
I think there is. I think when you talk about students seeking to recapture something of that personal, the easiest first step is to call mom and dad more. I think. So I think as we become young adults, I think in becoming more impersonal, and the thing that remains is parents. So I think definitely in that stage of life. In the childhood stage of life, I think it could be a bit of a different story. That you're looking with access to the internet, and even if parents are controlling and monitoring their children's internet access, they have access to a whole new world of ideas. That it's no longer, kids come up with a question like, a small child comes up with a question about dinosaurs, and they ask their parents, and they're just reliable on whatever their parents know and can find. Now they can just go on the internet and find everything they need on Wikipedia about dinosaurs.
Takes you to some very interesting conclusions about what's becoming personal influence, what's becoming impersonal influence.
Yeah, definitely.
Facebook is really another form of impersonal influence.
But it has personal aspects, and maybe the categories are going to completely change to to a passive and interactive. That there are going to be some forms of influence that just kind of exert influence on us, and there's